Dear guests, dear Minister Baerbock, good morning. Welcome to the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum 2024. We are very much thrilled to have you all with us today. I believe the Berlin Forum has rarely taken place with so many recent developments to discuss. And we are very much looking forward to do that, together with all of you, this very diverse audience today representing more than 60 countries. My name is Leslie Schübel. I am the program director for this Berlin Foreign Policy Forum, and I'm delighted to guide you through this conference day. Well, what a week lies behind us. And the news of the week are, unsurprisingly, reflected in today's agenda. You might have noticed that the printed agenda you found at the entrance does not completely match the one on our website and on the conference platform anymore. That is because we sent it to be printed on Friday morning, and we had to reshuffle a few things since then. The unfortunate news is some of the speakers we were looking forward to seeing here and hearing here today will not be joining us after all. The good news is all time slots stay exactly as in the printed agenda, and we have been able to work some magic and put together a slightly different agenda, which is no less interesting and relevant. I want to now take this chance to give special thanks to those speakers who have agreed to speak very, very short term, some of them less than 16 hours ago. I have no doubt that we have a fascinating day in front of us. And yeah, without much further ado, I want to hand over to Körber-Stiftung's member of the board, Thomas Paulsen, to kick off this Berlin Forum 2024.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, both here in Berlin and joining us via live stream. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all joining us today for the 14th Berlin Foreign Policy Forum. Dear Minister Baerbock, we are delighted to have you with us to open the Berlin Forum for the third time in a row. What a wonderful tradition. If I had to give a title to the political debate in this city since November 6, I would probably call it a tale of two elections. One election will lead to Germany becoming more preoccupied with itself in the coming months, no doubt, and a prospect that probably makes nobody all too happy, because Europe can only be strong if Germany is strong. The other election has produced a result which, surprising in its clarity, forms a turning point once again for us Europeans. The call to take our fate in our own hands is more urgent than ever. Yes, we will probably have to adjust to a harsher transatlantic climate, but especially at a time when our model of liberal democracy is facing powerful opponents at home and abroad, we should not lose sight of the power and value of cooperation with our most important ally outside Europe. And if this involves deal-making with a new president, I'd say so be it. But last week is not only a tale of two elections. On November 9, it also reminded us of one of the brightest moments of German history, the fall of the wall 1989, an act of freedom and self-determination. 35 years later, we are in a different situation. 35 years later, we need to defend our freedom and build resilience on multiple fronts against the rise of autocratic aggression, against the right of the stronger, against the erosion of international law and humanitarian norms, and through a steadfast and inclusive economic resilience. We must enforce our democracies, both at home and abroad, trust in institutions, immunity against disinformation and hybrid threats. These are not just domestic issues, they form the very foundation of our credibility and our capacity to act as a reliable partner in the world. In this year's Berlin Pulse survey, we asked the Germans about Europe's role in meeting these global challenges and sustaining multilateral alliances. 44% of Germans feel that the EU's influence has weakened over recent years. This underscores that while we may hold dear the values that unite us with our allies, we need to increasingly earn our place on the world stage. We must stay true to these values, but also recognize the need to act on the commitments they entail. Especially for Germany, one particularly challenging issue with regard to acting upon international commitments and expectations is the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. As a foundation whose goal it is to convey a deeper understanding of historical events and their significance for present-day political context, we are particularly committed to the historical and moral responsibility that Germany has as a result of the Shoah. This includes, first and foremost, Germany's commitment to Israel's right to exist, its security, and its right to defend itself after the October 7th terrorist attacks by Hamas. However, we also must not turn a blind eye to the terrible humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the immense suffering of the people of Lebanon. At a minimum, humanitarian aid must get through. Now, what do Germans think about Germany's international role? The results of this year's Berlin Pulse survey are quite remarkable, I think, because they prove that many Germans are indeed aware of the global changes and are increasingly prepared to step up to those responsibilities. Let me give you 3 examples. First, a remarkable 65% of Germans support defense spending of up to 3.5% of GDP, seeing it as either appropriate or even too low. Second, public support for Germany's active engagement in foreign policy has reached its highest level since we first conducted this survey 8 years ago. And third, after the American elections, a clear majority of Germans want to invest more money in European security. So Germans are increasingly acknowledge that with our global position come expectations, and that to secure a stable, peaceful future, we must actively contribute. Nowhere is this responsibility clearer today than in response to Russia's war in Ukraine, which still ranks as most important foreign policy issue for Germans, while as long as it takes is still far from as much as it takes. Germany has taken on a critical role in supporting Ukraine. For nearly 3 years, a clear majority of the German population has supported military aid for Ukraine, marking the strongest and most consistent backing for military assistance to another country in the history of the Federal Republic of Germany. It is, however, equally part of the truth that support for Ukraine is declining among Germans. European resilience needs the constant reminder that providing military assistance to Ukraine is not just an act of altruism, it is essential to securing our own future and maintaining a stable Europe. But the values we have committed ourselves to uphold reach far beyond the borders of the continent. As we navigate an increasingly interconnected world, it is critical that we listen to voices beyond our familiar circles. And this is why the Berlin Forum today is more global than ever, bringing together diverse perspectives to tackle the pressing issues of our time. The world faces so many complex challenges that even tracking them can feel daunting. In such times, we must listen, collaborate, and stand by the international principles that we have all agreed upon. We must work together to create a world where justice prevails over force, step by step. 1 year ago, Minister Baerbock, in her opening speech for the Berlin Forum 2023, called for, and I quote, "standing up clearly for our principles and at the same time sounding out where even the smallest steps will take us forward." Since its establishment in 2011, the Berlin Forum has been doing exactly that, offering a stage for principled debate, grounded in open discussion and a shared determination to sounding out the steps forward. I look forward to a day filled with lively discussions and diverse perspectives, or as our founder Kurt Körber has put it, talking to each other rather than about each other. In this spirit, Let's get to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas Pauersen. Before we dive right into sounding out the way forward, I only have one more remark. Throughout the conference, many high-ranking decision makers and foreign policy experts will offer their insights. To make the conversation as inclusive as possible, we want to encourage each of you to actively contribute. To that end, please use the hashtag #BerlinForum to join the conversation. All questions are welcome, whether on site in Berlin or from our live stream audience via X. For the next panel, I am now honored to welcome German Minister of Foreign Affairs, Annalena Baerbock. Unfortunately, Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs has had to cancel his visit to Berlin due to urgent domestic developments, which we very much regret, but of course understand it's a country at war after all. To make the conversation happen on our stage nonetheless, we have invited two fantastic experts to join Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock for the stage. Those are Lykke Friis, who is a former Danish Minister of Climate, Energy and Gender Equality, and now the director of the Copenhagen think tank Europa, as well as Liana Fix, whom many in this room probably know from doing my job for several years before moving to DC, to become Fellow for Europe at the Council on Foreign Relations. Anna Engelke from the ARD's Capital Studio will be moderating this discussion. The stage is yours.
Good morning from this all-female stage at this moment. Minister Baerbock, a week ago today, you were in Ukraine visiting the country, and you did this while the elections were going on in the US, and you did it to kind of shine the light on Ukraine and make clear that there is a lot of things are at stake. And now, a week later, and I want to pick up on what Mr. Pauersen said with the tale of 2 elections later, we find ourselves here on this stage. And with this in mind, what is Germany's view on the state of the world right now? I thought I'd put the easy question first.
Well, I'm not losing my good spirit, and as unfortunately I have to say, we are a bit trained already that crises are coming up and you didn't expect that the next day there will be another crisis. I still believe that the glass is half full. Sometimes you have to shake it a bit, that it's having some waves. But in a nutshell, it needs a strong Europe now more than ever before. And yes, last Monday and also last Tuesday, when I was in Ukraine visiting, for example, one of the villages which have been occupied by Russian troops in February and March 2022, and speaking to people who have been imprisoned in the basement of the school, more than 300 people, among them 6 babies, for 27 days, not knowing if they would be free after all, not having electricity, not having food, not having enough water in the basement, and experiencing there what freedom means. And this is why I was there, making clear that Europe, that Germany is standing at Ukraine's side, no matter how the election in the United States will end. I mean, now looking backwards, the visit was even more important because also making clear now 1 week later that Germany is standing by Ukraine's side, no matter how our election will end, because obviously these are crucial times and these are the times where we have to defend our freedom and peace in Europe.
And how has your world changed, your world personally?
Now we have to be even more focused, more clear on what we are standing for in a shorter time than expected.
We've been hearing from the US that there might be a pick, or it seems to be there's a pick for the Minister of State, Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, the former Florida governor and now a senator. Have you met him?
Him not personally, but I've met a couple of other men whose name has been dropped around these kind of issues. And I mean, it's obvious. We said before, also in our national security strategy, which we discussed last year also at the Körber Forum, Europe has to play a stronger role for peace and security on our continent. And now we have to play an even more stronger role. So it's not kind of things have totally changed. We prepared for that moment. Sometimes you wish for other things, but the world is not about wishful thinking. The world is about making politics in a quite challenging reality. So now we have to engage even more. And I said yesterday already at another forum, we have to increase our European pillar within NATO even stronger. And this is why now it's a moment where everybody, every politician, not only in my country, what I would say in whole Europe, has to look every morning in the mirror and thinking of what would my children ask me maybe in 10 years' time. What did I do in the winter of 2024, 2025? And this is a challenge, I believe, and the responsibility we have to live up to, especially from Germany. Our peace, our freedom, as Mr. Paulsen has said it in the introduction, 35 years of a unified Germany in the heart of Europe, living in peace and freedom. We owe it, especially also to our Eastern European friends. We owe it to Europe, and now it's time to give back to our European and Eastern European partners and friends.
Because you said that about strengthening the European pillar, and of course that means strengthening the German pillar and the German, maybe even payments for security. Mr. Paulsen just mentioned 3 to 3.5% of GDP. Germans are in favor of investing in security. Are you one of those 65%?
What I find interesting these days, because we are very polarized, not only what we have seen at the other side of the Atlantic, but I would say unfortunately also in Europe, unfortunately also in my country. I say it unfortunately because compromise is a strength of democracy. So polarization, I would say, is the enemy of good and productive discussions. But yet again, we are living in this world, so we are lobbying for, I sometimes tend to say 50 shades of gray, but rather say for the different colors of a rainbow. In this question, however, and this is what I find interesting, there's hardly any topic in Germany where you have at this moment such a high agreement toward it. So the narrative which some, especially also pushed from outside, from Russia, try to kind of push on Germany. There's no support anymore for the peace. There's no support for freedom. There would be no support for Ukraine. Obviously, this is not true. It's just that those who are not standing up for peace also in Ukraine, they are really, really loud. So, yeah, there's a big majority. And obviously, I've been arguing for this point of view that it's also about European peace. And yesterday I said, definitely we need now more than 2% of GDP. I'm underlining here GDP because those who know me longer, I was always arguing a bit, we have to be careful with GDP because it's, in the end, it's about capabilities. So at the moment we are about 2% because unfortunately our economic strength is not the best. But obviously we want to increase that one as well. So we have to invest definitely more, definitely also going closer to 3% like Poland and others are doing. But the crucial point is about capabilities, the complementarity with other NATO partners. And I believe, because if you bring down the GDP to the percentage of the budget, this is really high. So I believe our Sondervermögen, our special contribution, the 100 billions we had agreed to with also the conservative, this is an example how we could move forward. And this is also one of the proposals Ursula von der Leyen put on the tables. for the next 10 years, and I think this is the exactly right way, and we have to live up to it right now at this moment.
Look, in Denmark, I think it's 2.4% of the GDP that Denmark is investing in security matters.
More or less, yeah.
Close?
Yeah, close, yeah.
Okay. When you heard the news last Wednesday about, Trump being reelected and Germany's coalition kind of crashing, at least part of it, what did you think?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. Great honor to be here, and also on this all-female panel as a former Minister of Gender Equality. What did I think? Well, I thought that defending Europe less America is a title, is a point, but defending Europe with less Germany was also what was on the top of my mind. And I think we have all become experts on the constitution of Germany, Vertrauensfrage, and we're also becoming experts on the Schuldenbremse, and on apparently how much paper you have here in Germany to be able to conduct the election. So, but I mean, to answer your questions that are more precisely, I think there's also now the realization in other countries that we have to step in, we have to fill the gap, because there is a fear that when we have a wake-up call and we're all pushing the snooze button, then we'll be in real trouble. So to develop a clear Ukraine plan, how will we close the gap, so to speak, if, God forbid, there will be less aid from the United States. And personally, but this is also, I think, what is happening in the Danish discussion now, we should not forget EU enlargement. Because there's a tendency that we focus so much upon weapons, and that is obviously what is really important. But we also have to make sure there's perspective for people fighting in Ukraine. Also, I mean, being in the basement, so to speak, I've also been to Ukraine several times. They have to see that we really care and that we actually consider them as part of Europe and not just, a country far away. I think this will be important also for the upcoming Polish EU presidency next year, and particularly also for the Danish presidency, which is then the final part of 2005.
Yeah, but they've been saying this for years, that Europe has to step up its game. And when you look at it, for example, the Polish Prime Minister inviting the French President and inviting the British Prime Minister to a whatever summit to support Ukraine, I kind of look at the European Union and think, oh, okay, so that's the reaction.
Yeah, well, I guess you can say that we've not been able to Trump-proof Europe. We've not been able to live up to our overall sort of goal of making sure that there is this perspective Ukraine. But I don't see that as an excuse for not doing it now, particularly then developing this plan on making sort of Europe able then to defend Ukraine, or giving them the tools to defend themselves, because otherwise, as you also pointed out, Madam Minister, we'll really be in trouble, and this will be also part of our own security, and particularly one should also consider, what if Ukraine doesn't get the aid that it needs? What will happen then with refugee waves? Who would like to invest in Ukraine? This is a huge challenge, and yeah, I think that's just going to be a huge problem if we don't already now consider what are the consequences of not acting, well, now, even more than we should have done before.
Yeah, but Liana, before I get to you, I would just like to ask you, Ms. Minister, what did you think when you heard that about the summit in Poland? Or I call it the summit, it's the meeting of Tusk, Macron, and Starmer.
I think it's good, and I mean, my experience and what I've learned is we shouldn't look at kind of the points where we say, oh, maybe we should criticize it. So obviously the question is, why is not Germany being invited? But obviously last Wednesday happened, and at this moment where we care about paper, unfortunately, we have to be thankful, and this is how I look at it, that others are there who jump in at this moment. And also maybe part of the question was, why UK? And we always invited UK as well, because this is our European continent. I think we had also discussion here when we talked about the Brexit. Probably the majority here in this room and also in our country hoped that UK stayed. Again, there was another crisis which happened, and we obviously overcame them. Now is the moment to underline, even though UK is not in the EU anymore, they are one of the strongest actors within NATO, and therefore it's so important, and I'm thankful and glad that these three countries are meeting and making clear that we are standing up together, European Union and UK, for the freedom and peace in Europe, and also on the foreign minister level. We have the Weimar Triangle, for example, which we are pushing heavy to. We had a long phone call over the weekend, also discussing now the different roles in these shaky times, and I'm thankful that our friends and partners from France, from Poland, but also from UK are jumping in right now, while we are, unfortunately, I mean, it's crystal clear where I stood last Wednesday, are preparing now for an early election.
Yeah, well, we are being preoccupied with new elections or early elections. Last Wednesday, Liana, you're an expert in Russia and well known here in this room. Was that Vladimir Putin's lucky day?
Thanks so much, Anna, and it's, let me say it's great to be here back with my former colleagues. Of course, Russia has placed its bets on Donald Trump. That's very clear. But the picture is more ambivalent than we see it right now, and that's for two reasons. First of all, Vladimir Putin wants to win this war. Donald Trump wants to end this war. And there is a difference, because even Donald Trump cannot afford to be the one who has lost Ukraine, who can see Russian troops in Kiev, for example, in front of his Republican Party. And the second reason is that it's pretty unclear until now how exactly negotiations about the future of Ukraine that Trump wants to have within 24 hours will actually look like. There's a range of options, from Donald Trump giving away sanctions relief, stopping military support for Ukraine, to Donald Trump threatening Vladimir Putin that if he doesn't come to the table, the US will surge military support for Ukraine. And all these proposals are on the table, even if Mike Pompeo is out of the race. And this is where Germany and Europeans have to come in. Although this kind of negotiations by Trump all might sound like a betrayal of Ukraine, and I assume the first instinct of Germans and Europeans, and my colleague Sophia Besch and I have written about this, seems to, well, we stay out of this. Germans and Europeans have to get their hands dirty. They have to get into these negotiations, and they have to see if they can convince Donald Trump to keep military support for Ukraine going by taking over the financial support for Ukraine, for example. They have to think about whether they can convince Donald Trump, for example, by offering an observer mission that would observe a ceasefire in Ukraine. So there are options how Europeans can influence the outcome of any kind of negotiations. So we will not end up in an ideal situation, but we can end up with the bad option and not the worst option for Ukraine. And just one last thought, because one thing that we already know about the team that Trump is assembling right now is that this is a team of China hawks, very clearly. And if what I'm afraid of is that we will end up in a situation where China advisors come to Donald Trump and tell him, well, Europeans want you to pour money into Ukraine. They want you to pour money into European security. And at the same time, China, through its massive and escalating support for Russia, Russia is only able to continue this war through China's massive help, is neutralizing the support that goes into Ukraine and European security from the other side. And then someone tells Trump, well, Europeans are actually not doing a lot about that. So I think there are like 10 mainland Chinese companies that are sanctioned by the European Union right now. That's nothing. So in this logic, Trump will say, why should I invest into Ukraine and European security if Europeans want to keep their economic relations with China intact and don't do anything or not enough about China's support for Russia's war, which keeps this war going? And we should think about this linkage and this connection that Donald Trump might make to us in a much broader way, linking European security to China, to trade and tariffs and other options.
Mrs. Weber, could you see Germany being part of such an observer mission that Liana just described?
Well, in these times, it's a bit tricky, especially publicly, to debate about different theories and options. But observing, I would say, is definitely too little. I mean, and this is not in contradiction, I think we share many, many points. But what we have to secure right now, especially after this outcome, but also before, I think some things haven't changed, they were the same exactly before, is obviously there cannot be any peace negotiations over the head of Ukraine, but also not over the head of Europeans. And obviously this might be now more possible than before, but this question obviously was on the table also before. So we have discussed it, and not only discussed it, but also prepared for that, also among European friends. And I think the question is bigger, and this is why it's also bigger than an observer mission. The danger of any negotiations would mean maybe peace agreements or silence for fighting for a couple of months. But the question is peace in liberty, and especially peace for further generations, and peace not only with regard to Ukraine, but for the European continent. So Moldova, for example, Putin also hoped for that in the early months, Moldova would just fall by that. Thanks to another strong female leader, Maia Sandu, not giving up till the last second also of the election, Moldova resisted, and thanks to the braveness of the people there. But everybody in Moldova tells us, if Odessa falls, we don't know what's going on with our own country. So the picture is way bigger than just Ukraine. Also, I would say bigger than observer mission. We had an observer mission. It was called OSCE observer mission. Even Russians were in these observer missions. After the 22nd of February, this mission has been attacked, even though if Russians were into these missions. So if we are talking about how do we secure the peace within a deal, negotiation, peace treaty, however you call it, I think it has to be so robust that obviously we would need guarantees from further actors. China's a special issue, maybe I can jump on that one later, but the strengths of what we have done, and I don't want to talk this down at all, this is our strength. Putin didn't only want to occupy Ukraine and Kiev within a couple of months. He wanted to destroy NATO. He wanted to frame the narrative of the West is the worst actor in the whole world, and unfortunately he was quite successful in the first half year or even the year. When I've been speaking to other countries, especially to BRICS countries, for example, South Africa, but also Brazil, the narrative from Putin from the beginning was always, it's a fault of NATO. Yeah, we kind of don't know what's going on there in Europe, but it's a fault of NATO, so it was exactly the narrative from Putin. Even though when we had the grain export discussions, many actors in the world said 2 years back in time, it's a fault of you Europeans because you put on the sanctions. The good thing is that Putin did not succeed with this narrative because countries went. There was a delegation of African countries going to Kiev and afterwards to St. Petersburg. There were Gulf countries, also some ambassadors here in the room, and I'm really thankful to that, engaging, for example, in bringing back the deported children. So kind of hardly anybody in the world, except for North Korea and some other countries like that, nobody else is talking about maybe the EU or NATO started this war anymore. So at this moment of times, it's so good that other actors, like, for example, Qatar, is engaging in trying to bring back deported children. But unfortunately also they experience that Putin is not even ready to bring back children. So this is the point about the peace negotiations. So, and this is coming back to the observer missions. We need these actors who are engaging right now, which are non-European actors, because if we want an agreement where we can trust on, it has to be an agreement which is also supported by countries which are closer to Putin, which he could not blackmail and then, like the OSCE mission, say, oh, unfortunately, I attacked now the OSCE mission. If there's a blue helmet missions with countries in these missions, for example, where it's hard to explain at the Gulf or hard to explain at other parts of the world why he attacked now their soldiers, their blue helmets, it's a different part of the story. But I'm kind of taking this broader picture because there are so many different questions into it. And again, because the half glass has to stay half full. I totally share the view with China and the danger there, and also with the new administration. But you could also turn this on the other side of the story because of the role currently from China, because of North Koreans now going to Ukraine. Obviously, China didn't say anything against it, yeah? At least I haven't heard it, and if they would be against it, I think we would have known. So you could turn the story also around with regard to the new administration, saying, look, China is now even bringing North Koreans on the European continent. I mean, we have never seen that before, also in history. So I think we have to grab every argumentation, as you have said, and this is now the task we have to do, but we can only do it together, only as Europeans, but also only together with the 140 countries which are standing stable since the first resolution in the United Nations of saying we stand up for the Charter of the United Nations, because this is all about.
Nevertheless, times have changed, and when you look at the situation in Ukraine right now, you've got very, very tough fighting going on in the east of the country. You've got Zaporizhia being attacked in the south, and you have this strong coalition of Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. So let me bring in Luca, because you signaled that you were going to chime in.
Yeah, no, I just think there is a major risk of Europe-lessness, to use that expression. And I think we should also make sure that we live up to the Elvis principle, a little less conversation, a little more action. And I think there are definitely some things we can already do now without sort of waiting. We already mentioned the Ukraine plan. I also think we should look upon our energy sanctions towards Russia. I mean, they are not sort of strong enough, and we're not living up to them. Secondly, we should look into...
Just, you know, that would be one, ramping up sanctions.
Exactly, yeah.
Sanctions.
Secondly, you could look, I mean, the European defense industry is definitely something that we should look into now. There was just the news out from the Commission that one can use part of the cohesion fund, to make sure that we step up with regards to our investments also in defense industry. I think that is a crucial point. And then I think we should also make sure that we see, how we create more capital. I mean, the Commission's point was one. But I think if you talk about Schuldenbremse or Sondervermögen or how to create capital, we are all looking at Germany with regards to how do you create more capital? Is it Eurobonds or whatever? I mean, this will have to be sort of a crucial discussion, maybe even also during your election campaign. I saw that you came out with some interesting statements on that. And going back to Moldova also, and that sort of ties in with the point that I made at the beginning about EU enlargement. Again, we have to make sure we strengthen the enlargement, the membership perspective. And frankly, this also implies that we do something ourselves. Here I'm not just talking about money or sort of making sure that they live up to the criteria. We have to make sure that we live up sort of to the goal of being able to accept countries at a certain stage. And if I was sitting in Moldova and Ukraine, I would think, okay, what are you actually doing? I mean, are you changing your budget? Are you changing your institutions? I think this should also be part of the discussion that we would need to have, quickly.
Yeah, before we get back to you, Minister, I would just...
If I want to comment just quickly on the defense spending question, and I think that's so important to understand, and I had a couple of pretty interesting conversations in DC before, in the run-up to the elections. There is no patience whatsoever anymore in the Trump camp, in the Heritage Foundation camp, with European discussions about how to increase defense spending. They just don't care anymore. If you explain to them, well, it might be difficult to come to 3 or 4%, domestic populism, perhaps Europe will break apart if you withdraw too quickly. They just say, well, we don't care. You are rich. You have to take care of your own security. We were listening to these discussions for such a long time. The Ukraine war was not enough of a wake-up call for you, and we have a serious problem in the Indo-Pacific. We really don't care. And if we have to make a trade-off between Ukraine and Taiwan, we will make the trade-off for Taiwan. And if we have to make a trade-off between Taiwan and Estonia, because we have these two conflicts breaking out at the same time, we will make the trade-off for Taiwan too, not for Estonia. That's how these discussions are going. So just to underline the urgency of the defense spending question in Germany and also on the European level, And just very quickly on the China question, I mean, of course, a UN mission with European troops would also be great and very welcomed. I think another topic which is very important, and you, the Minister, raised this, is this axis of upheaval, or whatever you want to call this focus on the increasing cooperation between North Korea, Iran, China, and Russia, and the potential breakthroughs, not only what it gives to Russia, but what Russia gives to North Korea, what Russia gives to Iran, and what Russia gives to China, and how this can lead to breakthroughs in those countries' military modernization is something which will be incredibly important to this US administration. It should also be incredibly important to us because it gives those actors the possibility to escalate at all times together in a situation which can be completely overwhelming for us.
Yeah. I would like to get back to the impatient incoming US administration led by Donald Trump and the outgoing German government. And Ms. Baerbock, you said yesterday on a panel that you were really looking for more and stronger support for Ukraine, and you said everything that can be mobilized to support Ukraine must be mobilized now. Everything. When you look at Germany, at what we can do, what is everything? And I'm not mentioning the T word. I'm just, kind of hinting it.
Which is good, because, I mean, these are things, also some lessons learned from the past, talking about shades of gray or gray zones. I mean, the best strategy also for defense and deterrence is that obviously those who are trying to fight you do not know what next steps you are taking. And this is why I definitely do not go into material questions here, but talking about abstract. I said that also for a couple of times, but going again to Ukraine, and this is why I go there, seeing things with your own eyes, being underneath the ground. I was, I think, 30 kilometers away from the Russian and 40 kilometers away from the Belarus border when I was in Ukraine. Now I can say it, but not when I was there. Underground, because there the actors are built obviously security zones underground to be protected there, but it's crystal clear, and I felt the same when I was in Kharkiv, I think 1.5 years ago. They told me there, count till 60. And if you have reached 45, you can be happy because obviously you're still alive, but we cannot do anything if the alarm goes on because the rocket just hits Kharkiv. And this is how thousands of people, children, have lived and now studying also underground in the school underground because they cannot be protected overground. So the point that Ukraine cannot wait until the rockets are flying over the border, but obviously the only success in defending those cities, and I mean Kharkiv, it's a huge city, you talked about refugees in the beginning, is that you have to prevent that these rockets, that these drones, whatever is flying there, is reaching Ukraine. So this is one of the most important questions right now, and this is obviously one of the most important questions we are within.
And what is your answer?
That we have to do everything to defend Ukraine. Obviously, I mean, I'm the German foreign minister within the limits of international humanitarian law and with the limits of international law, but the definition of self-defense is crystal clear, that you don't have to wait until the rocket hits you, but that you can prevent it.
So we're talking about cruise missiles,
and obviously we didn't do everything right now. People are telling me in Ukraine, again, 8 times being there, the most important thing is hope. And this is, again, something we shouldn't ignore. If people give up hope, obviously, then Putin will succeed. So we have to make clear now that we are not only talking, but that we are delivering, and not only thanking Ukrainians for defending our peace here in Europe and also Latvia, and obviously, and this is the point, that it's also about the security of EU countries at this point. We have seen the breaches, especially from the Nordic countries as well, a couple of times already. Breaches on the water with the border with the boys. Breaches in the air with regard to Poland. Breaches in Germany where we had attacks, hybrid warfare here in Germany. I mean, we had a bomb threat on the spot where Moldovans should have turned in their voting cards. So obviously this is also about our security right now, and this is why we have to discuss all these things, and not only discuss, but to have to act on them. If we succeed in every part, I don't know. In a democracy, it needs majorities. In a European Union, it needs a common understanding. But the least what we can do is try to see now at this moment if maybe things are possible, which were not possible before. And yes, this is why, and thank you for dropping these topics, we have to talk about Schuldenbremse is not only in Germany, but we have the desk break and with the euro criteria and everything we discussed back in time when we discussed about the euro. So it's a European question about euro bonds and the question of European defense capabilities. We have set up the Sondervermögen already in Germany. I said already at the Munich Security Conference that there would be also the moment for a second Sondervermögen. So these are the moments right now if we are saying we really have to do everything that die Fesseln, die wir uns selbst gegeben haben. So the limits we put on ourselves should be on the tables again.
Okay, so let's get rid of the Schuldenbremse, that I would translate it like that. I would like to open up the discussion to the audience, and if you would just, give us a sign if you want to ask a question, and it would be great if it was a question. Over there, Jana Puljerin. At the very end, the microphone's coming.
Good morning. My name is Jana Puljerin. I'm with the ECFR in Berlin, and I have a quick question to Annalena Baerbock, because Annalena, you kind of avoided to answer the question on Germany's commitment when it comes to such an observer or more robust mission. And my question would simply be, under which circumstances would Germany be ready to send boots on the ground, or to send soldiers to observe and control a possible ceasefire or a possible zone of de-escalation?
Well, obviously, Germany is ready to do everything to secure peace in Europe, but there are very, very big differences, and we know each other for a long time, but we are here in a public debate. Boots on the ground as a narrative has been discussed totally differently than an observer mission under a peace treaty. So we have to make very clear that there are different parts of a discussion. So obviously, when there is a peace agreement and the question how we Europeans can secure peace, it would be a bit strange, and not only for Germany, but for Europeans to say we cannot secure the peace ourselves. We are talking about standing up to our responsibility within NATO capabilities, obviously also NATO missions, the brigade we have in Lithuania. Obviously, Germany would play as the biggest and strongest country in Europe, play in this. But why I addressed other partners is not to shy away from what our responsibility is, but I think we have to be frank and open to ourselves. Yeah, we had an OSCE mission there, and Putin obviously didn't care about attacking Europeans and his own people in these missions. So this is why I believe if we think about guarantees, and there's also the question about NATO membership, which I also said in the past, we discussed that in Washington, and we agreed in Washington. Ukraine's future lies in EU and NATO, so also this is clear. But unfortunately, I believe that we shouldn't trust kind of what Germany did wrong in the past. We just trust on the words of Putin with Nord Stream and other parts. So I wouldn't trust of saying, okay, there's some kind of mission, and we just trust that this mission holds. So this is why I said it's important to bring in other actors from the world, like we did already in the past, like South Africa, like Brazil, like the Gulf countries. This is why we are trying to bring them also to peace conferences, because sometimes it's harder to lie to your maybe closer friends than to those who you declare to fight against before. And therefore, I draw this bigger picture, not to shy away from German responsibility or whatsoever.
Okay, here we go. First row. The lady in the black.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Teresa Fallon. I'm with the Center for Russia, Europe, Asia Studies. I have to applaud Liana's comments. You were so clear and succinct about the urgency gap and how people are perceiving what Europe is doing. So we see an increased dependence on Russian gas, even LNG, by Europe. Increasing investments in China by European companies that doesn't contribute to any form of deterrence, let alone de-risking. And what does, when Macron went to Beijing, he suggested throwing Taiwan under the bus. So I understand why many in the US are concerned about Europe's position. But I'm hearing from some leaders in Europe, what can we do in the Indo-Pacific? Can Europe do anything? Do you think the US will even ask them to do anything? And is it just symbolic, or will it somehow increase deterrence or contribute to some form of deterrence? Thank you.
Yeah, so summing up the discussion in Washington, it's not necessarily about Europeans sending a frigate through the Taiwan Strait, although that was obviously a good signal. For years, Americans, it's really about burden shifting. And burden shifting is the term and the concept that is very prominent. It's not anymore about burden sharing. It's shifting the burden, the United States pulling away, especially conventionally, troops from Europe, capabilities from Europe to the Indo-Pacific. That's the plan. And they are going to do it on their own timeline. And this timeline does not necessarily correspond to the European timeline of how can we make up and replace those US capabilities that they will need in Taiwan and in the Indo-Pacific. So if we are lucky, we can end up and what we should try to do is to end up in a constructive conversation with the United States and with the Trump administration, saying like, well, why don't we come together and develop an action plan together, and you just wait a couple of years more before you move this capability to the Indo-Pacific until we got it sorted out, right? And I think that's the maximum that that Europeans can expect and demand in terms of trying to synchronize timelines, which will require from Europeans to pull so many timelines forward. And then the second part of it is, a little bit of military presence in the Pacific is great, and the second part is the economic pressure. The United States understands that Europe only has the leverage of has more economic leverage pressure on China, and they will demand from Europeans to use this leverage in the future. So there seem to be many hopes, and I'm reading newspaper articles about Europeans going for a hedging option with China, hedging against the United States, and China sort of opening its arms for new cooperation with Europe. I don't think this, and I'm curious to hear what the minister says about this, I don't think this will be really an option, because the pressure on Europeans from the Trump administration will be too high, especially with this team, and because it's just impossible in Europe's own interest to hedge with a country that is a security threat. China is a security threat to European security. And we have to conceptualize it in this way. And it's impossible to hedge with a security threat against the one country, the United States, that is our security provider, that we hope will stay our security provider. So, yeah, I think this sums it up.
Ms. Minister, do you want to add on that?
Well, we have only 3 minutes left, and this is a big new discussion, but obviously it becomes more difficult, but it's not, again, a new question. Also before, we had, with the old administration, the situation about discussing what is the role of China. Obviously, we as Germany, especially from the foreign ministry, we drafted a China strategy and a China policy, taking into account that our security concerns might be seen differently, not only over the Atlantic, but also from Australia, New Zealand, our partners we called for to support our European peace. And again, when I was there, they also asked this question, so what are you doing to secure our peace in our region here? And when I started to become a foreign minister, a very important person who had responsibility in the past was telling me kind of, focus on Europe, yeah? This is what we really have to care for. South Chinese Sea, Indo-Pacific, this is maybe the number 2 big for us Europeans and also for Germany. But now we have seen in the last 3 years, as everything is interconnected and the peace in Europe is also depending on the support from friends and partners from the Indo-Pacific, there is no question of anymore that Europe is also engaging there. And engaging for what? For international peace, for the international law, for the law of the seas, UNCLOS. I mean, who discussed UNCLOS before here in Germany? Now it's also for us one of the big questions, and I addressed it when I was in China, because it's also about guaranteeing an international rules-based order. So yes, obviously there has to be more engagement. We've started this process as well, but with the new Trump administration, it might be that the scenario will be like that. Then we have to face it and deal with it. But it's not kind of, then we have to change our strategy. Then we have to do more from the strategy of what we did before.
Just one last very quick question. Janis Kluge, over there in the middle. We'll try to do it real quick. I see the red numbers counting down.
Thank you very much, Janis Kluge, SVP Berlin. I have a quick question. We can expect that Donald Trump will try to start some kind of negotiations with Russia and Ukraine. Should Europe try to get a seat at the table, or should we stay out of it?
I think that's for you.
Well, again, my experience of the last 3 years, again, is not 100% this will happen. I mean, I've also heard what has been said in the past. Within 24 hours or 48 hours, there will be peace negotiations. So I've heard that. If I believe that, well, I'm not so sure. But obviously, I said that before, there can be only peace in Europe with Europeans, and especially with Ukraine. So there cannot be any peace negotiations over the head of Ukraine. But also, obviously, the US is the strongest player in NATO. This is why we have to do more as Europeans. And obviously as well, the president in Russia, and now with this new president from the United States, the experience our former chancellor had is that especially those 2 persons really like to speak to each other differently than some other persons maybe. So this is something which has changed right now. So we have to also adapt to this new situation, play it smart. This is like we always have to do it in these kind of circumstances. But what smart means, we have to see in the upcoming weeks and months. But there will not be any peace if Europeans are not at the peace table. I think this is also quite obvious.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Baerbock. Thank you, Lücke. Thank you, Liana. And of course, thank you for your time and for listening and asking questions. And thank you, Körber, for doing this.